Good morning. So today I would like to show you how I went about this project. In this project, I implemented a WordPress website with logical volume management on AWS. That's LVM storage management. So the major architecture of the project is such that I would provide a web server and a database server. If you look at the diagram here, this is the architecture of what the project should look like. On the left is where you have an internet-enabled devices, PCs, phones, tabs, whatever, with which you can access a web browser. So with the web browser, you can access the web server, which has the WordPress on it, and then a database server that has the MySQL database, with which the WordPress website will be dynamic. So let's go into the project and I'll show you how I went about it. It's kind of lengthy, the whole process, because I did everything manually, no automation, manual coding all through. So it's kind of a very lengthy project. So to save time so that this video will not be so long, I might move kind of fast so as to shorten the length of the video. But you can always see the full documentation on my GitHub account on the repository that has this title. I titled the repository Implementing WordPress Websites with LVM Storage Management. So you can check out the README file, see the full documentation and all the codes that I used and the prompts I used. You see everything there. So let's start. I wouldn't want the video to be so long, so I'll try to be a little bit quick about it. So let's start. So the major steps I took was that I prepared a web server, and then I prepared another database server, and then I came around to install WordPress on the web server. So for each web server, I'm going to launch an EC2 instance, create the volumes, create the logical volumes, create the volume group, and then mount the volume on a directory. So you will see how I did everything. Let's go ahead. So first of all, we prepare our web server. How do we do that? We launch an EC2 instance. We name this one web server. Then you can see then you go to the volumes. There are some default volumes already, but we're not going to be using those ones. We're going to create our own volume. So we're going to create 3 elastic block volumes. Create 3 of it. After you have created 3, while creating it, each one, ensure to assign 10 gigabytes space. That's what I did. I assigned 10 gigabyte space for each one, and then I attached the 3 volumes to that EC2 instance I created. That's the web server EC2 instance I created. I attached those 3 volumes to that same EC2 instance. So after I had attached it, you can see here how the 3 volumes, the 10 gigabyte 3 volumes, you can see the 3 of them, they are attached and in use, ready for use. So after that, I will now configure the web server volumes. So now, how do I do that? I logged into the web server through my terminal. You can use SSH. I used SSH to log in to access the terminal so that I can begin to configure. So the first thing I did was to check all the available block devices. I used lsblk command. I might not be telling you all the codes, so if you're interested in knowing the codes that was used, just check that README file to save time. I just wanted to show you how I went about the project. So I checked all the volumes, and then I also checked to see the mounted devices. After that, I checked to see if gdisk is on my terminal, is on my instance. I checked and I saw that it was already there. I didn't have to install it. This gdisk helps to create hard disk partitions on a drive. So that's the actual essence of that gdisk. And then, install gdisk. That's if you don't have it. This is what it does. It's a GPT-FT disk. It's also known as gdisk. and it's a text module menu driven program for creating and manipulating partition tables, just like I said earlier. So that's the major purpose of that gdisk. So with that, I began to create partitions. So I create partition on xvdf here, and then I created partition on the xvdf. These are the process. You can check my documentation to see exactly how to do that. There are inputs you have to be putting in to get that done. So when I had created that, I could see that it's successful. Look at it there. It says operation is successful. Then we can now check to see the newly configured partitions. You can use your LSBL key again and check. You'll see that the partitions has been created. Then we now install the LVM. The Logical Volume Manager is a versatile disk management partition system designed for Linux. So this also helps to partition. So with this, we install the LVM too. This is the command that was used, and then we run a scan to see the logical volumes. You run a scan, and then the next thing we do is to create physical volumes. This will initialize each of the block devices to be used as physical volumes. Then that's what I did next. So I created physical volumes. This is the code I used, sudo pv create. I did that for each of the device, the mount points. So I ran that code on each one, xvdf, g, and h. So I ran it on all of them. Then okay, so after I ran it, I check to see if it's been created. You can see the response there, successfully created. So you now run the sudo pvs to check, and you can see there the 10 gigs, 10 gigs, 10 gig. It has been created. The physical volumes have been created. So the next thing you do is to name a group, create a group. That the essence of the group is to hold the three groups together into a particular drive. It will treat the three volumes as a singular drive. So you create the group, and then you add those three partitions into that group. So you can handle those three partitions instead of handling one after the other. You interact with the group. So the group would treat them as a singular drive, and that's what I did. So I created the group and I added the three volumes, the physical volumes, to that group. I named that group VG. So then I created 3 volumes. So after that, I now checked if the volume is created. So to check, you just type sudo vgs. If you look at the response there, you can see that web data VG, the name I named, is now 29.99. That's the 3 10 gig volumes together. That should have been 30 gig, right? But the system takes some of the memory for some other background functionalities. So you can see it's been merged into one. So yeah, it's more like 30 gig. That's the essence of that group I created. So the next thing we do, or I did, was to configure the web server volumes. Now I have to create logical volumes now. That will utilize the logical volume management. So now the first thing I did was to create the logical volumes. So I used the codes. If you want, just like I said, you can check. So what I have to do is type sudo lv create. I did that, and then I checked, and I could see. So now what I did was to create two logical volumes, just two, because WordPress needs those two. Those are the 2 major volumes WordPress need. On one of it you have the WordPress application itself, and then the other volume is where you have the logs. So those are the 2 major folders or 2 locations that WordPress needs the memory around on the application server. So the first volume was the application, that's the apps lv. You can see what I put there, apps.lv, that's apps logical volume, and then the logs logical volume. Those are the 2 volumes and then the idea is to split the entire 30 gig into these 2 volumes so that I can use them for the memory needed for my website. So that's already done. So to verify my entire setup, you can type sudo vg display. This will display all the volumes created. We created the physical volume, and then we created the logical volume, and even the group, everything. You see all the details here. If you go through this, you see every detail of what has been done so far. So now I check my volume blocks again, the LSBLK, I check again. If you see now, you can see that the volumes have been attached to the logical volumes have been attached to those drives. You can see it. So I move on. Then I check for each one. You check. I just a check just to be sure I'm on the right track. So I run LSBLK to check the list like we did before. Then the other checks too, which is the sudo LVS, that's logical volumes, the sudo VGS, the volume groups, and then the sudo PVS for the physical volume. Everything is intact, so we are good. Now we configure the web server volumes format. That's the format of each of those volumes. We're going to give it the right format. So we're going to be formatting the volume file system. How do we do that? What I did was to format the logical volumes with ET4 file system. ET4 file system is a particular file system. There are other file systems, but this one works well for regular websites. So that's what I did. There's a command, that's it there. Just run the command for each of the volumes. So it will format it, bring it to the right format. So when I've done that, when the format is correct, I will now create different folders. Now these folders is where I will now mount the app and the logs. So the first one we are going to create is the var www.html directory. This will store our web files. This is where the web files will be stored. So I created that, and then I created another folder again. This one is the home recovery logs. This one will store the backup of our log data. So those are the 2 major folders, directories we need to create. Then after we are done, we can now begin to mount. So now we are going to mount those volumes on the directories. So the idea is when the website is running and then you have your web files, it will be going to that particular directory, but the volume is already assigned to that directory. So if you restart your system, you start your server, your files are still going to be there. It's not that you start your system or your server and then your web files are gone, you have to reinstall, reconfigure. No, all those things will not be happening. So the idea of this is to make it more consistent, it stays. So now we mount the first one. We mount the var www.html directory. We mount it on the app LV logical volume. We're going to mount the other one also, but the other one is not very because there are some log files already. So what we're going to first do is to back up all the log files in the log directory. There's a log directory already, so we go to the var log directory, then we'll back up the content into home directory /logs. When we do that, so this is where while I was doing all that, you can see, and then I can now mount the var log on the logs volume that I created, the logical volume I created. After I've done that, I can now restore the files back to the var log. That's just how to go about it, and that's what was done. So when we are done with that, we can now configure the mounts so that it will persist after the restart of the server. If you don't configure it like this, if you restart your server, those files are going to be gone. You have to be refreshing. So but with this, you still have your files, so you configure the mount so it persists. Then you configure the mount to persist after restart of the server. So that's it. This is the process that was being done. Then we can now test our configuration, and then we reload our daemon. That's the code. Then we verify the setup by running the dfh. Just go through the markdown file, you see all the details. So that's what I did, and that gets us through with that particular stage. So the next thing we now want to do is the second server, the database server. Everything we did so far, or everything I did so far, that's how I went through the project, has been on the web server, the EC2 instance that I named web server. So that will be our web server. That's where we're going to put our WordPress sites later on in the project. So now we are going to prepare the database server. This is where we'll be using as our database, that we are going to be having MySQL major here. So now everything we did for the web server is what we did, or what I did again for the database server. So I wouldn't want us to be going through it in details. Everything is the same, except that I begin to label this as DB. Instead of web server, I label it as DB just to differentiate. So the first thing we do, we create an instance, we name it database server. You can see I created another EC2 instance over there, and I named it database server. And then I created 3 volumes again and attached the 3 volumes to that database server. So we can have those 10 gigs, 3 of them, just the same way I did before. Attached it, you can see it's attached, and then I log into the instance, the database server instance, and then I begin to run all those configurations, the same configurations I ran on the web server. I did everything all over again, all over. So I'm going to skip over. So just follow through. The first stage is the same. The only difference is the DB labeling, the tagging DB, just to differentiate our resources. So now we are now ready to install WordPress on the web server. So to do that, the first thing we do is, I just opened, I have my 2 terminals still running. I didn't close my web server terminal, so I just kept them side by side just to differentiate and then work on them both at the same time. So the first thing I did was to update my repository, and then when the update was complete, the next thing is to install my Apache. I install my Apache on the web server. So install it, the codes are there. Then after installing, I start the Apache. After installing the Apache, I install PHP. Then I also install the dependencies for PHP. For PHP to run properly, it needs some dependencies. So all those things have to be installed. Also, the codes are there on the markdown file. I don't want this video to be so long. So I install the PHP and its dependencies. When I'm done, I check the PHP version. Just PHP-v will show you. You can see it there. And then I can start my PHP. After starting it, you can see it was running, active and running. Then I run this SE stats, that set symbol, and then this set symbol has to do with policies. It's necessary, so you have to run it. There's a code for that, and then restart the Apache. That's done. So at this point now, I'll now download and copy WordPress to the var www.html directory. That's the next thing to do now. So for us to do that, we can just download WordPress. That's the code for you to download WordPress. You check, you see the code there. So after downloading, I extract my WordPress files. After extracting my WordPress files, I will now configure my PHP to work with WordPress. So after configuring my WordPress and my PHP for the WordPress files that I just downloaded, I'll now copy my WordPress to the var www.html directory. Then I'll now configure the SE Linux policies. This SE Linux policy is also important for Linux platforms. It has to do more with policies. Those policies determines what commands and how things work around the Linux environment. So it's very important to configure it to allow WordPress function properly. So that's what I did here. And then after that, then I can now install my SQL. That's the database server. So I do that on both servers, both the database server and my website web server. The essence is so that the major database is on the database server, that's in MySQL, but we need to still have a MySQL client on the web server. That would allow the major database to interact with the website. You know, your website, WordPress, is a dynamic site. It works with PHP. It's not a static site. It's such that you can impute, the user can impute across the browser, and the data will be used to develop an outcome. So it's a dynamic site. It gives you response, not like a static site that just shows you. It cannot listen to you. It cannot do what you're asking it to do. You know, but a WordPress site can give you a dynamic website whereby you get responses. You put in data, the data is processed, you get an outcome. So that's why it receives data. It has to, and it has to have a database where the data is stored. I believe you understand that. So that's what I did here. So I checked and I make sure that both MySQLs are running on both servers, and then I have to configure my SQL. I'm trying to round up now, the time is running out. So I configure the database to work with WordPress. These are the codes I used. You can check the markdown to see what exactly. Then I configure my database to work with WordPress. After I've done that, I access MySQL. The essence of accessing it is to create tables. So I configure the database, I name it, create tables that will work for this particular site. And then the address also, I had to go and create an address bind. So I access my MySQL D and then put in my IP address for the web server into the database on the database server. So when I did this, I actually encountered errors. I couldn't move forward. So I kept trying different things, but the errors were not going. I kept having some errors. So I began to investigate. So I checked, I saw that there was something wrong with the web server. I checked some resources. When I went through everything, I was able to fix it. I can't begin to explain all that now. And then I noticed that I had not updated my inbound rule. You know, so I had to go to my inbound rule. That's under the security groups for the web server. I had to go and correct and change the inbound rule, which is to allow MySQL to come in. So I had to change it to IPv4, MySQL Aurora, TCP 3306, and then I put the IP address for my web server. So that was what I did, and then the error was off, so I could move on. And then I checked and I show and to see that my MySQL client is receiving detailed data from my database and vice versa. So that's what I checked here. Install MySQL client and test that they can connect. Yeah, just like I said, that's what I did. And then I configured the WordPress. You know, WordPress needs some configuration. Put the database, key, secret key, login and all that, login and password and all that. I had to configure all that so that I'll be able to log in, create a root address and all that. So this shows that the data is communicating. So, and then I had to set up the SE Linux policies again. I had to be sure that it's well configured. You check for the code. There's a code, just a code. You just run the code and it would correct it. So when I did that, I went to the terminal, to my browser, put in my IP address. So I tried to access from my browser and then I saw that my WordPress is good to go, it's working. So you know now how to set up WordPress. If you don't, maybe I'll do another video to explain that, or you can just research it, just check it up on YouTube, check other people how they install WordPress. But if you want me to show you how, no problem. So I just impute the passwords and the user, and then you can now log in. So I logged in and voila, WordPress working. And then this is the website. This is the back end and this is the front end. People access the website. So it was a successful project. So that's how I went through it. I'm sorry I had to rush it. I didn't want it to be a very lengthy video. So if you really want to do something like this, you can just look at this, go through this video to have an idea of how to set up WordPress on EC2 instances and set it up properly so that you can develop a robust website that can handle traffic and handle data storage better, unlike getting it from all those shared servers from people like Namecheap, GoDaddy. They share servers, they share VPS with you, and then you have some issues along the line. So this is a better way to set up your WordPress website.